I'd like a working definition from you. Can you help me understand what it means?
So, a textbook definition of empathy is if you just Google the word, it's going to be, placing yourself in the other person's shoes and understanding what they're going through, being able to relate to them. But a more practical, definition of empathy, which I came across when I did share that video on LinkedIn, was so just understanding what empathy is not gives you a good understanding of what it really is. So, what empathy is not is endorsement. So, when you are relating to someone, when you are trying to understand someone, you don't necessarily have to agree with them, but just understanding why they're doing what they do, or what circumstances led them to behave or act in a certain way. um, Giving yourself that opportunity to understand them gives you a good idea of, this is why they did something in that direction, and it just allows you that freedom that you don't have to necessarily agree with them. You're allowed to have your own standpoint, but you still you don't feel as emotionally charged. You don't over personalize problems. You attribute, someone else's something that someone else did that you did not like or did like, for example. You don't necessarily find ways of relating it to your own self. I mean, connecting it to your own self, that they did it because they don't like me, or they did it because they wanted to get back, or something of that kind. But when you truly are empathetic, when you truly understand that, this might be the reason, like, given this person that they come from so and so background, or they've had such an experience, so they will behave or act in that way. It's natural for them to do so, so it has nothing to do with me.
Well, this is uh, a fascinating approach for me after doing now 20 some years of research into various topics. Step number one, you said, was let's understand it correctly by understanding what it's not. And so when I hear people talk about empathy, I hear people talk about, for example, it means that you can care, really care about them, and you would be invested in their well-being. You would worry. In other words, you would not want them to feel unloved, unappreciated. You would you'd be more forgiving. You'd be more believing in people. Take their word for things. You'd be less judgmental. You'd be less skeptical. You'd lose your objectivity. You'd you'd even be stopped by just understanding the complexity of this and not want to take any action whatsoever because of so many things that would be on your mind. And these are the things that I hear with regards to empathy. But if I heard you right, and you can correct me on this if I didn't hear you right, but what I heard you right is you can empathize with people that you don't sympathize with at all.
So all of the things that you mentioned, that the things that you've heard about what empathy is, that you care for someone, and you might even be forgiving, or you truly want to help them. Of course you want to help them, of course you want to have that bond with them. But at the same time, empathy allows you to be very objective, like you mentioned, that you can have some distance from the other person. You can understand where they're coming from, where they're going. But all of the things that you mentioned earlier, I think those are choices that come out of sympathy or empathy. They're not empathy in their own self. Absolutely. So let me just illustrate an example for you. This is a hypothetical situation, but influenced from real life events. So suppose you do have a client or a customer who's you just find it so difficult to sell your product to them, and you want to take rational and very businessy decisions as to what can I do that just flips their mind and gets them to have that sort of a bond with me. Now you can try all of the things that you, and I'm not discounting the education that business schools provide. So nothing against all of that. You can try all of your technical solutions, but they might not work because that element of empathy might be missing unless you can figure out a person's why, as to why won't they have that bond with me, or why are they acting this way, or why do they not prefer me over someone else, over a competitor. Unless you are able to understand their why, which is where empathy helps, you won't be able to make a step forward, and you won't be able to get to the point where you're wanting to go.
Skill. How the heck do I recognize it in somebody that I'm thinking of hiring? Any advice?
All right, so obviously one way of understanding if someone is empathetic is to see how they've reacted in a similar situation in the past, where they were at a crossroads with someone, whether it was a colleague, whether it was a customer, whether it was someone who was directly managing them. So how did they what was the solution that came out of it? How did they move from the problem part of it to the solving part of it? I think if they do mention that, and this is something that will come out over the course of when they're explaining the whole situation. I think it's easy for us to make out, to to see if um, did they use any sort of personal element in the solution process. Did they try to figure out what is it that the other person, what is it that's causing the other person to act in this way, and should I mold my strategy according to that, so that I can go through this process smoothly. So I think something along those lines would be very helpful.
What you said was get them to tell you the story of a significant incident, listen attentively to that story, ask follow up questions, and discover things like why they did what they did, what they saw, the insights they had. Did they mold and adapt their approach rather than just a textbook approach based on things that they drew? And were those things that they drew out things that told you that they had a greater rather than lesser understanding of the person that they were talking to, where it almost piques your interest as to how they intuited their discovery, or how they intuited their reaction. And that's fascinating because so many people want to interview off a long list or maybe even a short list of 99 questions, one after the other, rapid fire, bullet points, blah, blah, blah. And this is like delving into one thing to really let it blossom and give you insight.
Just what we've been doing over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
Getting people to tell us their stories, and describing to someone else their uniqueness. So the task that you gave out, I think that plays wonderfully into this, and it's really helpful. Without knowing it, we are we are building the capacity for empathy in ourselves.
Another question then, if you would help me, how can I improve my empathy? Give me some professional, educated suggestions. I could use them.
Okay, so one of the first things that we learn in our field is that yes, we want to understand someone completely. We want to understand their why, but at the same time, we don't want to get carried away with it. We still want to retain our own values, our own beliefs. We want to understand them, but not agree with them. The first starting point, would always be to listen some more, and then to listen again.
The first suggestion you have for me is listen, listen more, and listen again.
Yes.
Good one. Okay, I'll write it down. What's else? What else?
And the second step is to recognize if there's anything that's flagging in the conversation for you. Is there something that the other person is talking about that you don't agree with, or you feel that it's going against what you stand for? So the whole point of empathy is just to understand, that this is what they've grown up with, and this is what, you know um, this is what they carry at the core of their self. Now you don't have to change that. You only have to understand that. And then based on, if we are in a business setup, we just use that information, and we try to adapt our approach according to that. So if that person, really values, consistency. So if your company is able to provide, if you are able to assure them that they will have, anytime they call, whenever they have a problem, there will be one executive dedicated just for them, to help them out with their problems. So that kind of consistency, if you can, weave it into your business and then provide it to them, I think that opens a lot of doors for you. That's where you hit the nail on the head, that this is how I solved the problem, by putting some personal element into it. Now you did not have to, for example, in your top three priorities or your top three qualities that you value, maybe instead of consistency, it was commitment, honesty, and good ethics. So maybe it's not the same as you, but then you use that information that you get from the other person, and then you provide something back to them.
This seems to me to be a core competency. In other words, everything that you described is something that I would think, from my research and my time watching hundreds do self-defeating things in business and also do things that were marvelous. This is a element that makes them so much better because they're more intuitive. They're able to see complications. They are better at leadership because they're going to engage the person in a stronger relationship and know how to move them little by little and maybe even in big steps, but they're going to understand it in a way that it makes sense to the person that they're leading.
Yes.
It's absolutely core. So we will do more with it. We will understand it to another level. But for today, I think we've got a lot to unpack. So, well, it's not the end of this discussion. It's the end of our time together today. Are there any final thoughts that you have that you'd like to share with the group?
So, once again, for all the people who have not had a chance to look at the video that I shared on LinkedIn, I am going to be sending it in the group. Just it's a short video, about 8 to 9 minutes. but it's wonderfully explained. And I think once again that will, emphasize the point that empathy does not necessarily mean endorsement. So just understanding someone's experiences, how it makes you and them more human to each other, and how that can be used to develop, personal relationships or business relationships. I think that's something that we can all start with. Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here and just to talk about something that I've studied and contribute to the group. And I really look forward to having and continuing this discussion about how having personal elements in business can really help us make the difference.